I've always been drawn to the forgotten, the discarded, and the antique. The thrill of hunting for hidden treasures and unearthing stories from another time has always fascinated me. So when I had the chance to open my own antique store, it felt like a dream come true. Little did I know it was more of a gateway to a waking nightmare. The Mirrored Enclave, that's what I named my store, a charming corner shop filled with antiques, each with their own story. But the true showpieces were the mirrors. Victorian hand mirrors, heavy Baroque wall pieces, even sleek Art Deco designs. You name it, I had it. People loved them, yet there was always something slightly off about them. The reflections seemed distorted, showing more than they should. The first oddity I noticed was a small Art Nouveau mirror with intricate copper engravings. One day, I caught a reflection of a woman in a flapper dress. She was admiring a vintage phonograph that, in reality, was across the room from her. I turned, startled, but found no one there. I shrugged it off as a trick of the light. Then it happened with the other mirrors. A Victorian vanity mirror reflected an elegant ballroom filled with dancing couples, a stark contrast to the quiet, dusty store it sat in. An ornate Gothic mirror showed a dimly lit stone castle, the clanking of swords echoing from its surface. The mirrors were not just reflecting, they were revealing, glimpses into different eras, different realities. As days turned into weeks, the reflections became more peculiar, more sentient. The figures in the mirrors seemed to acknowledge my presence, their eyes meeting mine. An aristocrat in a Baroque mirror bowed to me, a 50s housewife in a mid-century modern mirror waved. It was eerily fascinating, and I felt drawn into their world, spending hours observing these alternate realities. One day, a new mirror arrived at the store, an oversized Victorian piece with an ornately carved wooden frame. I propped it against a wall, and what I saw in its reflection made my heart freeze. It showed my store, but it wasn't empty. Shadowy figures were wandering, examining my antiques. These were not charming time period apparitions. They were grotesque, almost demonic. Their eyes glowed with an ominous light, and their smiles revealed rows of sharp, gnarled teeth. They were horrifying. Before I could move, one of the figures looked up and met my gaze. Its smile widened, and it started moving towards the mirror. Panicked, I threw a blanket over the mirror. The vision was cut off, but I could hear a faint scratching from under the cloth, like long nails against the glass. I began covering the other mirrors, one by one. The charming scenes were now overrun with the same shadowy figures, each one noticing me as I approached. The scratching noises grew louder with each mirror I covered, the shop filled with a cacophony of eerie sounds. I'm trapped now, in my own store. Every night the figures try to claw their way out of the mirrors, their distorted faces pressed against the fabric. Every morning I check the blankets, fearful that one day I might find them torn. The nights became restless ordeals. The scratchings and the inhuman growls from beneath the blankets gnawed at my sanity. Despite the horrors, I couldn't abandon the store, feeling an inexplicable tie to the mirrors and the dreadful creatures they held. Eventually, I realized that I couldn't keep living in fear. I began researching, digging into the history of each mirror, the symbols etched onto their frames, hoping to find something that could explain these alternate realities and how to stop them from bleeding into mine. One night, a breakthrough came. In an ancient text, I found mention of a mirror of the veil, a cursed artifact from the Victorian era that could open doorways to other realms. A chill ran down my spine as I recognized the description of the ornately carved frame of the oversized mirror I had recently acquired. There was a ritual to seal the mirror, requiring a concoction of rare herbs and the light of a lunar eclipse. The next eclipse was due in 2 weeks. I started preparing immediately. Days blurred into nights as I gathered the required materials. The atmosphere in the store became denser, the creatures becoming more aggressive as the eclipse approached. The night of the eclipse, I took a deep breath and uncovered the Victorian mirror. The grotesque figures snarled, reaching out towards me. With shaking hands, I began the ritual. The concoction hissed as I spread it over the mirror's surface. I chanted the incantations from the text, my voice barely audible over the howls from the mirror. The figures recoiled as if in pain, their screeches echoing through the shop. As the lunar eclipse reached its peak, a brilliant beam of moonlight broke through the window and hit the mirror. The figures screamed one last time, their forms disintegrating into shadows that were sucked back into the glass. The shop fell silent. The mirror now reflected my shop as it was, empty. But my nightmare was far from over. In the ensuing calm, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The grotesque figures, their ghastly smiles, and the deafening screeches were all gone. The other mirrors, once their prisoners, returned to their harmless reflections. It was as though I'd awakened from a terrible dream. Days passed without incident. I resumed my usual activities, dusting off old trinkets and attending to curious customers. However, an air of unease hung over me. The mirrors continued their silent watch, making me feel like a moth drawn to a flame. It was a gloomy Wednesday when a new antique mirror arrived, an unsuspecting oval frame with an air of elegance. It looked like any other mirror in my store. I placed it on an empty stand, but as I turned to leave, I noticed something strange in its reflection. There was a man, standing right behind me. Dressed in a shabby coat, his pale face was worn and weathered. His hollow eyes met mine. A shiver ran down my spine. I spun around, but there was no one there. I turned back to the mirror, and there he was, closer now. His cracked lips formed a sinister smile. Panic surged through me. I quickly covered the mirror, expecting the scratching noises. But all I heard was a faint laughter. The man, unlike the grotesque creatures before, was not trying to escape. He was simply there, trapped in the mirror. Over the next few days, the man was always there, his eyes following me around the store. One day, I decided to communicate. "Who are you?" I asked hesitantly. His voice was gravelly, like stones scraping together. "A mirror trader, just like you." A chill ran through me. He continued. "I made the mistake of crossing a vengeful spirit. Now I am trapped, a prisoner to my own merchandise." "What do you want from me?" I asked. "Release," he whispered. I researched relentlessly, trying to find a way to free the man. I was not going to let my store become a prison for this unfortunate soul. But my search led me to a dreadful revelation. The man was not a victim, but a notorious occultist from the Victorian era, infamous for trapping innocent souls in mirrors. The vengeful spirit he spoke of was one of his victims who had turned the tables on him. The knowledge filled me with terror. This man, if released, could wreak havoc in my world. I knew then that I wasn't just an antique store owner. I had become the jailer for an ancient evil. So now, I spend my days and nights watching over an antique store that serves as a prison for a malevolent occultist. Every day he pleads, he threatens, he tries to manipulate me into setting him free. But I resist, I persist. Because I know, the horror I'm living now pales in comparison to the nightmare that will be unleashed if the man in the mirror ever escapes. The man in the mirror never tired, always waiting, always watching. His pleas for freedom turned to threats of revenge. He vowed to shatter the barrier between his world and mine, promising a reign of terror. Despite the horror, my store became a beacon for the eccentric and the curious. Unaware of the undercurrent of terror, customers marveled at my collection of mirrors, delighted by their aesthetic allure and historical significance. The truth remained hidden under layers of dust and time, while I bore the weight of the secret. As the weeks turned into months, a strange sort of equilibrium settled in. I opened the shop each morning with a deep breath, bracing myself for another day of silent terror. The man in the mirror remained a constant, chilling presence, his hollow eyes ever watchful. However, one cold winter morning, I noticed a change. A group of schoolchildren on a field trip stood before the oval mirror. To my growing horror, I saw that they could see the man too. The children froze, their innocent faces reflecting fear. The man grinned, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. Finally, fresh souls to converse with. I jumped into action, shooing the children away and hastily covering the mirror. The shop fell into a terrified hush. I tried to laugh it off, blaming it on the inventive imagination of children and the allure of antique mirrors. But I knew the truth. The man was growing stronger. His presence was no longer confined to just my perception. The barriers were weakening. Dread settled deep in my stomach. I knew I had to find a way to strengthen the seal or risk unleashing this ancient evil into the world. I buried myself in research, desperately searching for a solution in age-old texts and forgotten lore. My days became a blur of cryptic symbols and chanting incantations, with the threat of the man in the mirror looming over me. Every night, his laughter echoed in the empty store, his voice promising the horrors that awaited once he was free. The fear was palpable, a living entity that stalked me in every reflection. I was on the precipice of a terror far beyond what I'd experienced. The mirrors in my store, once charming relics of the past, were now portals to an